when a lot of people hear the word persuasion, what they hear is manipulation. And that's absolutely not the same thing. As in, with manipulation, you could say we're trying to give somebody no choice. Where persuasion is we are giving people options and we're hoping that they will make a yes decision that's based on their own values. And the great thing about that is that when somebody makes a decision to do something from within, when you walk away, they're going to stay changed.
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more months than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
What is the number one skill employers say they want most in something almost nobody was ever formally taught? And what if the guest sitting across from me today has spent more than 2 decades studying exactly why people say yes, not through manipulation, but through science? Welcome back to the Give a Heck podcast. I'm your host, Dwight Heck, here to help you live life on purpose and not by accident. 27 years ago, my guest today was a frustrated sales rep traveling across Australia selling scuba diving equipment to retailers. He was putting in hours of effort that were not translating into results, and he refused to solve that problem by lying or cheating his way to a sale. That frustration led him to the work of Dr. Robert Cialdini, the New York Times best-selling author whose book influence has been shaping the way the world thinks about persuasion since it was first published in 1984. It's sold more than 7 million copies since, and this year Forbes ranked it in the #1 pick on their list of 6 timeless business books. Discovering that work changed the entire direction of my guest's career. For the past 27 years, with Dr. Cialdini own permission, he has been teaching the science of ethical persuasion to professionals around the world. He's now one of the small number of trainers worldwide licensed directly through Cialdini Institute, a founding member of that institute, a business partner of the doctor himself, and the author of the book, How to Hear Yes More Often. He builds everything he teaches on hard research rather than instinct, and he spent his career proving that doing this ethically and doing it successfully are the same thing. Patrick, welcome to the Give a Heck podcast. I'm so grateful that you've decided to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Thank you for inviting me, Dwight. Happy to share how I got here, and also happy to share some of the insights of how persuasion works, some of the rules, and some easy to implement strategies that your audience can use immediately to be more persuasive without damaging their integrity. And I do very much remember when I was first exposed to this material that I kind of couldn't believe how relatively simple this was. As in, are you serious? Is this the way it works? And when I give a keynote or a workshop and I've got a whole group of people in front of me, I can slowly see that penny drop. I can slowly see those eyes get bigger. And I'm hoping that we might achieve a similar sort of reaction in your audience today. So thank you for putting me in front of them.
You bet. I appreciate you investing some time with us. So, Patrick, I always like to start at the beginning because our origins shape absolutely everything. I genuinely believe the trials and tribulations that shape us are the very things so many people listening right now can relate to most, whether they realize it or not. Where did your story actually start? What was it like for young Patrick growing up long before you ever sold anything to anyone?
Well, my parents had a paint and wallpaper shop. And so, 2 days out of the week after school, I would be sitting in the back or upstairs doing my homework, that sort of stuff. So I was always sort of around that retail environment and seeing my parents work really hard. And I had a reasonably successful store, but then again, what did I know? I was 12. Um, but anyway, they worked really hard. So from that point, it was like, well, I'm going to take over the shop of my parents. And my parents, at least, and I have to hand it to them. They also always said, listen, if you want, it's there. We're happy to hand it over to you, but you don't have to do this. You can do anything you like. So, you know, if you change your mind, don't feel any pressure, right? We'll just sell the shop, sort of thing. You do whatever you like. So I went into retail college, and sort of trades, marketing, advertising, all that sort of stuff. And then, yeah, as I got a little older, selling paint and wallpaper didn't appeal that much. And I was an avid scuba diver and snorkeler. I loved the water. And so I started doing, how do you call it in English? An internship with for school at a dive shop. And so I was working retail, selling snorkels and masks and regulators and air tanks and all that sort of stuff. And from there, you see people come to visit who buy equipment that were working overseas in tropical places. I'm from the Netherlands originally, in case you haven't worked that out from my last name. And yeah, weather's not so great most of the year. So, tropical places are very appealing. So I actually packed my bag, sold the motorcycle, and went to Thailand, got my instructor ticket there. And so been traveling the world for quite a few years, selling, you know, diving education, I suppose, and wonderful experiences. And that eventually led to Australia. But yeah, I think that exposure to my parents working really hard in a retail shop, they were always at it 6 days a week. Um, if something had to be organized, one of them had to be in the shop so the other could sort of leave. There was a lot of effort being invested, and to sort of bring that back into persuasion science, the I suppose the cold hard reality is that when people don't use the available science, they're not doing so well. They might not realize it, but if you imagine, this is my favorite example, if you imagine an architect building a skyscraper and not using the available science, that we all cringe, right? It's not going to turn out so well. And we all see the world through the lens of our expertise. And so I can't look at a restaurant menu and not think you got that in the wrong order. If you change the order, you sell more. I can't read a brochure and go, nice pitch, but you fail to establish believability, right? And all these things are losing people successes that were theirs to have, that were on the table, but they didn't get them because they didn't know the science. I mean, if you're in business, you're actually in the business of convincing other people that what it is you have to offer is a good idea for them. And so most people in business, especially those starting off, they're investing so much of themselves, the money that they have. And then as they grow, there's so many families that depend on them because they've got employees. And when they're doing that without the science, there's so much loss happening. And I think they owe it to themselves to work more effectively. I mean, if you go to the doctor or get surgery in the hospital, you'd hope that the surgeon would use the available science, wouldn't you? So I think from that point of view of my parents working so hard, I think I saw and felt firsthand of how much effort goes into running a business. And now knowing that you don't need to work that hard if you work a lot more efficiently, and you could do that without lying or cheating, just makes all sorts of sense to me. So I guess maybe that's some of what drives me in the back end.
Oh, that's great learned behavior. I started working for my dad at 12 as well. Plus, on top of that, I had a paper route that, it may not seem like a business, but I had to collect money. I had to take care of the clients and customers. And it was literally ingrained in me and how you treat people and about lying and cheating. My dad was the same way, and he had a huge business. And I had the same opportunity. I could have taken it over, but I walked away from it when I was older. I decided it wasn't the thing I really wanted to do. It didn't make my heart sing, right? So, no disrespect to my dad and my mom. They're both still alive, 85. But at the end of the day, we have to find our own place in this world, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely have to. So, one of the things that, so you ended up selling scuba diving equipment, right? Across Australia. What drew you was what your parents did? Was that what drew you into being in sales? Is that what was the biggest magnetic thing for you?
Probably, yeah, I would say so. Just seeing that around me, and we say sales, and it is sales, but as you know, a lot of people have a bit of an adversity to that word, as in they think it's twisting people's arms and that sort of stuff. I just hear helping people. If you come into a paint and wallpaper shop, well, you want to create something at home that you're proud of and you feel comfortable in, and we're just there to help you. And I guess, you know, I think that should apply in all businesses. You're just trying to help people. But yeah, no doubt that's probably something that put that in the forefront of my mind. And I certainly never mind helping people.
Yeah, those listening or watching, you're selling yourself every single day, every moment of your day, every moment of your life. You're selling yourself to your significant other. You're selling yourself to your friends. You're selling yourself to your clients, to your boss, to your aunt and uncle. And it's not a bad thing. I don't know how the word is become so tainted in so many people's mouths, right? Or how disrespectful they are when they go into stores when somebody comes over like a paint and wallpaper shop and says, "Hey, can I help you out?" And they feel like you're pressuring them. Well, no, you're there to assist them. That is part of the sales process, right? So I appreciate that's why I wanted to ask because I like hearing other people's interpretations of what sales means to them and why it is so important. So one of the things though, you were frustrated at how much effort you were putting in for so little result. You refused to solve it by lying or cheating, as you had mentioned. What was it like the first time you actually encountered Dr. Cialdini's work? And did it feel like the answer right away to you?
Thanks for asking. So the way I first encountered it was what was interesting. So I was working for a wholesaler in scuba diving equipment for the brand Oceanic. They're still around, lovely dive equipment. And so I was a sales rep, and I was looking after the states of Victoria, South Australia, and Tasmania, which is not the whole of Australia, but it is one big piece. And my boss wanted to grow his business. And so he had hired a business coach, business consultant to help him with that. And good on him, right? It's good to get outside perspectives and put us back on track and help us work on our vision. And this gentleman, I hope he's still around, but he was quite mature back then. His name was John McDonald, and he was a former business partner of Jay Abraham, who, of course, we've might have all heard of. And he came up with a strategy that, well, he did some observing of people who ran dive shops. And he said, well, they're all lovely people, but they don't necessarily know how to run a business really well. And so the concept he came up with was to train us sales reps to be sort of a low-level business coach to help our retailers actually grow and double their business. And so we were trained to do sales training with our retailers. So it took the whole relationship to a whole different angle, which was quite nice. And anyway, John was based in Vermont in Melbourne, and I was also based in Melbourne. And so John had said, well, listen, Patrick, if, with the strategies that we're teaching all you sales reps to implement with the retailers, if you've got any questions or you want to talk about something, just come by the office. Well, I don't know if you've ever been on holiday, Dwight, where you've bumped into a Dutch person, and you might say, if you're ever in Alberta, right, you need a place to stay, come over to our place, right? Don't do that with Dutch people. They turn up, right? free accommodation. Um, so anyway, John had invited me, if you ever need any assistance, want to talk about something. And I figured this guy was expensive, right? So you invite me, I come. And so he was, I mean, back then we had, educational series, cassette tapes, CDs, and they were expensive back then, right? Nowadays you can go and get an, like Audible or something, you can get a voice file for a few dollars and learn amazing things. I remember paying $1,200 for a set of Brian Tracy CDs, right? So very expensive. And so he had a lot of those. And so he started lending me these series, which I really appreciated. And of course, I had very, very long drives to do. So the car was like the rolling university, as we would call that. And so I was always listening to stuff. And amongst one of these series that he was lending me was a cassette tape series from an event called Mind Capture that happened in Los Angeles before the turn of the century. And two cassette tapes on there of Dr. Cialdini explaining the science of persuasion. And I loved it. It was so, I still love it. It's just so cool. I mean, you can recognize yourself in it because we're all human beings. But the simplicity of it, or how absolutely stupid some reactions of us can be, is really interesting. So it fascinated me to no end. And then I was actually faced with a bit of a challenge. I had taken on an additional brand. This was a brand of dry diving suits. For those who don't scuba dive, a dry diving suit seals on your neck and your wrists. You wear whatever you want underneath it to keep you warm based on what water temperature you're going into. A little bit more complicated to dive because the air can move around in the suit a little bit. But I've used a lot of these suits in the past. I've used them in the military, in the Netherlands, recreationally, different suits in Australia. And this suit was called Hot and Dry. It was honestly the best designed dry diving suit I'd ever seen. And I still think about it that way. But I'd taken it on. I was all excited, and I walk into my retailers, and proud as punch. I said, I've taken on a representation of Hot and Dry," and they laughed at me. And I go, "Well, after last year's debacle, we're not touching that again." I go, "What are you talking about?" And so I didn't know this, but the year before, the inside membrane that's supposed to keep you dry, they changed manufacturers trying to save some costs, and the new material had all delaminated, and all the suits they sold the year before had leaked, and they all had to be replaced. And so my retailers go, "You're a nice fella," because they knew me already, "but we're not touching that again." And so here I was, I've got this awesome suit made in Australia. So for Australians, economically priced because there's no wholesaler in the middle. How am I going to turn this around? And that was exactly when I'd sort of, worked my way through the material of Dr. Cialdini. And so I went to work. And so looking at the situation, what have I got available here that I can ethically bring to the surface, what I can make people aware of, things that I might be able to do in the situation. And anyway, to make a long story short, in about 18 months, we were market leader in that suit. We were in that market where we're selling so many suits. So ever since, converted, loved it for life. And I've since learning it, always had that need to sort of pass it on to people. So where we were being trained to be sort of sales trainers, actually reach out to Dr. Cialdini via email. You could still find his email address on a website for Arizona State University back then. I remember looking him up on my 4.5 gigabyte compact laptop with CD drive. That was very exciting. And I emailed him, and I thought I'd never hear back from that gentleman. But yeah, the next day there was an email. Nice to hear that you've had such success with my work. And I said, I've just got this need to pass it on to other people. And he said, well, just let people know where you got it from. Good luck with your endeavors. So since then, I've started, educating people about the science of persuasion.
Yeah, it's what a story, though. And then to get to a point, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, to be one of his certified trainers. and something that you just randomly got given to you to listen to. Is amazing how those little seeds in life are there, but you took the opportunity to water, right? To water that seed, to learn, to grow, to apply, to make a difference. Good on you, right? So many people just let things pass them by and they have regrets when they're older and go, oh, we had nothing ever went our way. And some of these people, I know them when they say this stuff, and I know the different opportunities they had. They just didn't know how to carpe diem. They didn't know how to seize the day, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
congratulations. I love it. So, for someone who has never studied this, the science of ethical persuasion, what is the actual difference between persuasion as a science and persuasion as most people imagine it? A natural talent some people just have.
Yes, great thing to dive in first. And I think we should also pull in the fact that when a lot of people hear the word persuasion, what they hear is manipulation. And that's absolutely not the same thing. As in, with manipulation, you could say we're trying to give somebody no choice. Where persuasion is we are giving people options and we're hoping that they will make a yes decision that's based on their own values. And the great thing about that is that when somebody makes a decision to do something from within, when you walk away, they're going to stay changed. They're not going to revert back to what they were doing before. A good example is, the boss, right? The boss is in authority, and the employees really should do what the boss asks. But when they do that and it doesn't come from within, when the boss walks away, things revert back to the way they were. One of my colleagues has a nice test that he used to do with his team. If you're the leader, walk away and see if your meetings are still conducted in the exact same way that you would like them to be done. When everything is different, you haven't been persuasive. You've been using force, which is the hierarchy, using force to get people to behave a certain way. So we want to persuade people so that they make the decision from within. And persuasion could be described as using words and images to increase the chances that people will say yes to us. So it's not that I'm having a discussion with a single individual, they said no to me, as in they didn't want what I had to offer, or they're not doing the behavior that I asked them to do, because persuasion is not per se about sales. It's actually about behavior. That can be buying behavior, which makes it very valuable, of course, in sales, but it could also be getting your employees to use the new safety procedures that have been implemented or something, or creating more loyalty and coherency within a team. That's all behavior, and that's where persuasion applies. So we can try and force people to do that, but it doesn't really work really well. We want that decision to come from within. And so what you were saying, well, is it a natural talent? That's also what a lot of people think. There's just certain individuals that can walk into a room and, change everybody's opinion around. But when you ask them, how do you do that? They often can't explain it to you. They can't teach it to other people. And if you dissect it, they typically use maybe one or two principles and only a few strategies from within those principles. I mean, there's 7 principles of persuasion and probably a dozen different strategies or application methods within each. And they've just stumbled across a couple that work really well for them. And so they also get confidence with that, and it works really well. But the good thing is that persuasion is a science, and therefore it can be taught, and therefore it can be learned. And the best example is probably Dr. Cialdini himself. He's not your, he's an energetic gentleman, but he's not your sort of personality that you would associate with a natural persuader that just walks into a room and changes everybody's opinions. He's, if anything, a bit of a introverted university professor, but he's probably the most persuasive person in the world. He's certainly been paid the most for it, I'm sure. So yeah, this is something everybody can learn. And on top of that, it's not just business related. This is an important life skill in every part of your life. If you're trying to convince the family on where we're going to go on a holiday next year, or you want your teenager to clean up their room, right? You're going to have to be persuasive. So it works there as well.
Man, I wish I would have had that as a single dad raising my 5 kids full time. Yeah, I probably could have used some of those persuasion skills, like you said, clean your room or do the dishes, or let's. Yeah, it's it's shocking though how much learned behavior or how people in life assume things. There's so much assumption, right? About persuasion, about anything, manipulation. And usually it's because they have somebody that's got a broke mindset that's educating them, or they've had some sort of attraction to this person and something they said really stuck with them or was the truth. So then everything else that they said after the fact was the truth. And I've just seen this time and time again. So those that are listening or watching, the 7 universal principles of persuasion. Those watching, you can see it in the background. Patrick has it listed there. Um, and I'm reading it myself and looking at it and thinking to myself, wow, some of that is so simple, but yet most people will just let it go over their head like an airplane, right? It's just going to fly by, and you deserve more, those listening or watching. So we're going to get into a little bit more about these 7 principles. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time, so we might have to have Patrick back on just to go through them and with more specifics. So without turning this into a lecture today, so we can get through some other things, go ahead and read off the 7 principles. But which of those principles, because you said that you also mentioned that sometimes people just grab onto a couple of them. Is there any specific principles that you could discuss today that someone sees in every conversation or interacts with?
Yeah, sure. Let's run through it and let's just see where it takes us. So the 7 principles of persuasion, we would call them universal because they work in all languages, all cultures, and all countries, which is, a valuable concept, right? Because within our own country, we've got different cultures, but it's also very easy to deal and communicate with people in other countries. So this is something that works everywhere. And yeah, as you mentioned from reading the list behind me, all these words you've heard of it before, you might know the concept of it, and it's very easy. And I'm sure there's lots of people that are listening to this who have actually read Dr. Cialdini's book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. It was first published in 1984, sold over 7 million copies by now in 48 different languages, and is considered by many top CEOs to be the best business book ever written. And what I recently discussed with someone is that certainly in business, you can learn things to do business, but what you learned 5 years ago is probably completely irrelevant now. Where this increases in value because persuasion has been important to us since the dawn of time, and it's not going to go away. But because our world is getting more and more overloaded with information, people actually respond more readily to the information that those principles represent. And so they make it easier for people to make a decision more so than ever before. So if you invested in learning this skill 10 years ago, you're still using it now, and you'll actually get more success with it now compared to 10 years ago, because how our brain works hasn't changed, but the input we're getting has changed, which made this more important. So these 7 principles, I'll reel them off real quick for those who are listening. We've got reciprocity, liking, unity, social proof, authority, consistency, and scarcity. Now, all these principles have activators, things that turn them on, and they have amplifiers, things that make them work harder. So we can go through what would you like to do? Shall we dive in, see where it takes us, or do
Sure,
you want me to?
sure. Pick something because there is other things I want to discuss, and we're going to run out of time. Obviously, I have no issues with having you on a second time, and us go into it more in depth. But pick something that you would figure one or two of them that would be something that you would really want to focus on in this conversation right now.
Um, well,
Not
maybe
that they're
before.
not all important. I know
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
all
yeah, yeah.
important. I don't
Well,
want to disrespect that.
if we're gonna do a second one, let's do your audience a big favor and let's first discuss how decisions are actually made. That'll make them understand why this stuff is this powerful.
Sounds
Sounds
good.
good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to lean on the work of a Professor Daniel Kahneman, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, but he won a Nobel Prize in economics in 2002. And it was, for people who are not too familiar with Nobel Prizes, it was a little bit surprising, as in he was a professor in psychology and a behavioral scientist. So how does they get nominated for a Nobel Prize in economics? That was because a lot of his study was about the decision-making process, and decisions shape economics. So that's where the link was. And so basically, old economics had a belief that he disproved. Old economics thought that human beings are logical, rational creatures, and they would therefore use logic and reason to formulate their decisions. Daniel Kahneman demonstrated that that's not the way that it actually is. So he explains it in terms of decision making this way, and I can relate that to your audience so they understand. So when it comes to decision making, your brain, your audience's brain, and when I say audience, I don't necessarily mean an audience in a theater, right? The audience is the recipient of your communication, right? So could be an audience, as in a theater style setting, but it could also be your employees. It could be a potential client you're talking to. It could be a teenage child or your partner, right? Whoever receives your communication. We all have two parts of our brain when it comes to decision making. We have system one and system two. System one is fast. It is an unconscious brain. It works outside of our conscious control, and it works automatically in making decisions. And it uses a lot of shortcuts or rules of thumb to make decisions, things that have proven to be right most of the time. It takes very little effort to run system one. And so we use it for everyday decisions. But because it uses shortcuts, rules of thumb, it does sometimes get it wrong. So we do say it's error prone. Let me jump to system two, and I'll come back to system one. System two, on the other hand, is slow in its thinking. It costs a lot of energy to run system two. And Daniel Kahneman referred to it as the lazy controller. It doesn't actually want to engage. It's quite happy for system one to make the decisions. And if it gets too difficult or red flags go up, then system two will kick in. So it's slow, costs a lot of energy. This is conscious thinking, where system one was unconscious. And system two is more reliable. It looks at all the available information and comes up with the most reliable answer to this situation. Okay, so let me jump back to system one. Let me talk about these shortcuts that system one uses. So we have either within us from evolution or learned from our environment shortcuts, rules of thumb that have served us well in the past. One such shortcut might be expensive equals good, right? We've learned from experience that if you buy something that's cheap, chances are it's not going to last that long, it's not that good, and it might not be suited to purpose so well, right? We know if we spend more money on something, chances are it's better quality, it's going to last us much longer. So if we're going through an aisle in a, I don't know, hi-fi shop or hardware store, doesn't matter. And we're faced by a decision we need to make that we really don't know anything about. I don't know, buy a front door for your house. You could, in that moment, delay your decision. You could leave the hardware store and you could go to the library and you could start reading up about timber types, door construction, glass types, varnishes, paint, all that sort of stuff. Maybe you do some workshops on how to make doors. And then 5 months later, you could come back to the hardware store and make a well-educated decision about which door to buy. But I don't know about you. I don't have the time for that. So in that moment of needing to decide which door am I going to pick, what could happen is that rule bubbles up in the back of my head and goes, hey, you know what? Expensive equals good. So I was thinking about spending this much. If I just add a bit more to the budget and I just pick that next door that's a little bit more expensive, I'll probably have done the right thing here today. And that's exactly what will happen. You will probably have done the right thing, because most of the time more expensive things are better. Not all the time though. Sometimes more expensive things are still rubbish, right? But most of the time that rule holds up. And because it holds up most of the time, that is a tempting shortcut for us to get to a quicker decision. And so the other door goes into my trolley and I turn the corner into another aisle where I'm faced with another decision about something that I don't know much about, and I'm exactly in the same situation. So that's an example of a shortcut. Another example of a shortcut would be, if a lot of other people are doing it, that must be the right thing to do, right? Because we know most of the time, if a lot of other people are choosing to do something, there must be value to that. We must be safer when we're doing that. A classic example, you're walking through a town that you haven't been to before. You got your partner with you and you're looking for a place to go have food. If two restaurants in front of you, one's completely empty, one's half filled with people, which one do you not go into? The empty one, right? Because, well, if they all went there, maybe there's something wrong with the other one. Or maybe they have a great deal on at the moment, or whatever it is. You could go interview people on the street and say, oh, do you know anything about these two restaurants? Or you can try and look up if Consumer Affairs has any complaints about food poisoning. No, you haven't got the time. The visual of just seeing more people in one restaurant over the other is enough for you to make a decision. It's a shortcut. Great. So system one runs a lot on those shortcuts. And so system two, our logical, rational part of the brain, uses available information. Now, you would like to think that, especially when it was an important big decision, that we use logic and reason to formulate our decisions. And Daniel Kahneman demonstrated back in 2002, or before that, that 90% of our decisions are made by system one, automatically, subconsciously, outside of our conscious control. And it's now said that that's 95% or even more. Now, first of all, we should wonder, wow, I mean, how many decisions can you make on autopilot, for goodness sake? But you might also wonder, why is this percentage increasing? And that has to do with our attention span. I mentioned earlier, our world is overloaded with information. And Dr. Cialdini, he describes it as we live in the most information overloaded, stimulus saturated environment that has ever existed on the planet. And every year that's true. And so we get so much information thrown at us that we have so many decisions to make. And a good example is the smartphone, right? I mean, the internet had a big impact on us, as in a lot of information, a lot of ability to make decisions about things more quickly. And the smartphone, yeah, it was like the nail in the coffin, right? We need to make a phone call, we unlock that thing, then we, there's like 35 apps that pop up asking us to make a decision if we want to interact with that. Then, goodness, we might open one. And so now this app tells us about this, about that, message from him, message from her. There's a video link, link to this, link to that. You're on another website. 20 minutes later, you put the phone down and you go, what did I pick that thing up for? Right? You can't even remember, right? And you didn't last very long before you were off track. And so our attention span is getting shorter. In the 20s, we had an attention span of 20 minutes. Have you got any idea what the attention span of the goldfish is supposed to be?
8 seconds.
9 seconds for the goldfish.
8 seconds for humans.
7 seconds for us. We've been eaten by the goldfish. And so what that means is that we lean very heavily on that system one, that intuitive part of the brain. And here comes the big problem. Here's the punchline after all this. When you don't know the science and you're contemplating how you're going to convince someone about whatever it is you want to persuade them, convince them about. When you're thinking about that, you're using conscious thought. So you're using system 2 in that moment. And system 2 has the annoying habit, you could say, to come up with rationale, with arguments that would need system 2 in the other person to process that information. And they don't have the time for that anymore. And so when we present, if we fill our persuasive arguments with things that fall into the logic and reason category, as in it's going to save you money, it's going to be good for the environment, right? When we do that, we actually create more uncertainty in our audience because they now have to engage system 2 to deal with it, and they haven't got the time for it, they haven't got the bandwidth. They throw it in the too hard basket. They push back from you and your wonderful, genuinely good for them, good value proposal. They decide not to decide. And so if you, in a period of time, if you make 1,000 proposals, could be anything, could be your lead generating efforts, it could be a sales call you have with someone, or a face-to-face meeting, or a speech that you give to your staff to do things this week a certain way. When you do 1,000 proposals in any given period of time, you might get especially if it's in sales, a small amount of yeses out of all those pitches. And so therefore it will be easy to say, well, then the rest of them were no's. I would argue that's not actually the case. You'd be horrified to find out how many of those no's were not no's at all. They were indecision. People decided not to decide. Instead of just giving them logic and reason that is trying to engage system 2 of their brain, it's only in charge of 5% of the decisions, what might actually happen if you just gave them a piece of information that system 1 could go, hey, that applies to a shortcut. If I do this, that'll probably be good enough for me, and the decision is made, right? And that's why the impact of using persuasion science can produce such large results. Bose, for example, Bose had an advertising campaign that was really underperforming, and good on them. They recognized that, and they had Dr. Cialdini look at the ad. He changed, it was a very technical ad, but he changed only the headline because it subconsciously worked against Bose. And he just changed the headline using a principle of persuasion that worked in Bose's favor. And sales went up by 45% with the headline, just because it now gave a piece of information system 1 could make an easier yes decision with. So this whole story of how decisions are made highlights to us that people are leaning more and more heavily on system 1, and the principles of persuasion are basically categories of information, categories that help us to identify that type of information that functions as shortcuts for people. So what we want to do, we want to use our system 2, our full brain power, to also come up with information that qualifies for system 1 in our audience, not just system 2. And when we do that, big things can happen.
Wow. I'm looking forward to the second episode where we'll actually dive into it because I think it deserves its own uniqueness, its own time, just because of the fact that I can imagine, as you mentioned, there's so many different layers of those 7 universal principles of persuasion. I'm really a person that's into learning about human nature and how we think and how we process stuff. And I don't take any of it lightly. I take it very serious, not so serious that it engulfs my life, but it enhances my life, right? That's what I tell people: knowledge and education, and it gives you power. It impacts you in a positive way, and you just have to be open-minded. You have to be the willing to understand that everything you've learned could be half truth. It could be all wrong. It could be, it's time to continue to grow and move forward in life. And I like how you mentioned about persuasion changing you for it continues to grow within you, right? It's
Yeah.
not something that changes. It's something that you constantly use to stay on the climb. And I appreciated how you explained that.
Yeah, and everything we've covered before and what's coming, it's all based on scientific evidence. There's nearly 100 years worth of research on this
I
area.
love it.
So there's no Patrick gut feelings.
Yeah,
We may simplify things with examples to make it easier to digest, but it's all based on research.
somewhere the spark has to ignite, right? Something has to be an ignition system for people. So those examples and the way that you've been explaining things is great. If somebody gets a little spark, a little ember in their heart and or in their mindset and wants to grow, I've accomplished what this podcast is designed to do, to give a heck about people, that they deserve to grow outside of their circumstances. I'm not saying everybody that listens wants to grow outside of their circumstances, but most people that listen to my show want to give a heck. So I'll make an assumption that majority of the people that are going to watch or listen to this are going to be hanging on this and waiting for a second episode. But what we're going to jump into now is your book, How to Hear Yes More Than Often. I know myself, I found writing my book was very cathartic, right? Writing my own book was one of the most, again, cathartic things I'd ever done. There were moments that caught me off guard, memories I hadn't let myself sit in for years, and quiet little celebrations I never told anybody about. Small wins nobody saw but me. So when a guest has written their own book, I always want to know what process actually cost them and what it gave them as well.
We How to Hear Yes More Often was a joint effort between myself and some other of the certified coaches and trainers. And we didn't want to write a book explaining how the science of persuasion works because, Dr. Cialdini wrote the definitive text on that. And if you don't have that book Influence, even as an audio book, you really should listen. It's quite entertaining, actually. It's a way of writing. It's very easy to digest, and you'll every now and then have to push that jaw back up from things you've heard. It's very interesting. But so we wanted to write something to complement his book. The book Influence explains the science, but it was mostly written as a sort of a self-defense book. Bless Bob, when he wrote the book, as in who is his audience, he actually wrote it for the people that, the everyday people that were supporting the university. He felt like there was something to be reciprocated, that he should give back. So, he was in academic circles. It wasn't normally not really done for, a professor to write a book to explain to normal people how this works. This book was written as a self-defense book. It certainly can help you to implement things. And after the book was published, especially people in business really latched onto it because it also highlighted that there's no need to lie or cheat, right? You can do this in a much more effective way, ethically, And what I'm always happy to highlight is that research shows that you can use this unethically, and it might produce short-term results, but it tends to produce long-term disaster because people don't come back to a situation where they didn't do good in the arrangement. Where research shows that if we use this ethically, it produces short-term results and long-term success and creates long-lasting, loyal relationships. So it also makes the business world a better place, I suppose. So we didn't want to write something that, was rehashing all that. So with How to Hear Yes More Often, we did something to complement the book Influence, and that is to give people ideas on how to use this in practice. And so my chapter in the book, for example, I dissect in great detail that story that I touched on before when I was a sales rep and I had this dry diving suit that my retailers laughed at when I walked through the door. What did I do? How did I turn that around? And so in great detail, I go, what I did, what I looked for, which principles I used, how did I turn that around? Where some of my other co-authors come at this topic at a completely different angle. Leopold Ajami from Dubai, famous speaker or popular speaker, he takes it from a presenting point of view. If you're on stage, how do you use persuasion science? John Dorbar, he takes it from if you're an introvert and you need to talk to someone or do something in sales, how do you use persuasion? So everybody comes from a different angle. So it makes it a nice combination. So if you haven't got Dr. Cialdini's book yet, it'd be a nice combination to have How to Hear Yes More Often with it. Read Influence first and then venture into How to Hear Yes More Often.
Sounds great. So they complement one another, basically. Like you said, your book is going to give real life examples through storytelling, which is one of the most powerful ways to share information. Itself, though, you touched a little bit about what I was going to get into about ethical persuasion, and you mentioned earlier it's not manipulation. What does it look like? What could you tell us more about the fact of what it actually looks like in practice, giving us an example of the differences between manipulation and ethical persuasion?
Okay. Maybe so we've touched on something and a strategy before we close off here. Let me weave this into this example. So the way I see that ethical persuasion is practiced is that first of all, we need to know the science. We need to know what these principles are and how they work, right? So for example, social proof I mentioned before, if a lot of other people are doing something, it must be true, must be right? The rule of social proof we can describe as saying people have a tendency to follow the actions of others, especially when they are numerous, when they are similar to us, and when we are uncertain, right? So we react to what others are doing. Scarcity, for example, says that we value things more that are rare, that are scarce, that are dwindling in availability. And so what we might look for when we're writing an email or we're designing a brochure or we're making a website, how am I going to convince someone to start scrolling on my website, for example? It's a little entertaining to realize that a lot of people think that when they eventually succeed getting someone to their website, that they'll all start scrolling. You'll be horrified how many people end up on your website, give it a second or two, and then go, nah, not for me. And they're gone, right? They don't always scroll. And so testimonials are popular on websites, right? And that's good because that's social proof. It's the behavior of others who've already used you and were happy. But you find those further down the page, you'll never see them, right? So what people show, it's called above the fold, the area you see without scrolling. It is crucial that you have some persuasive information there to just motivate people to start scrolling, to go further down. And so maybe you could use scarcity in that moment to say, hey, you know, there's something to be missed out on by not reading on or, using our service. So you're looking for what elements to bring to the surface, but the tricky part, it's not tricky, but what a lot of people that don't know the science don't understand, they'll often ask, what's the most powerful principle? Well, there is no most powerful principle because it depends on the situation. You either, or no, sorry, not either. There's, let's say, 3 stages to getting somebody to do a certain action or hoping that they will. First of all, you need to have a relationship with them, right? If they don't like you, well, it's going to be a lot harder to motivate people to do something. So relationship building is important. Once the relationship is there, they like you, they love you. Now, uncertainty is our problem because people will not be clear on that what it is you're suggesting is a good idea for them. So it's uncertainty that we need to reduce. And there's other principles which are great at that. They're your go-to principles for that. So now, let's say if we have a good relationship, we've reduced uncertainty, right? People love you, love your product or your service, but they're still not buying it. Now, motivation is lacking. Right? So there's other principles that are go-to principles for motivating people into action. And I love asking this of a room full of people. If I can get you the tools to build strong relationships, to reduce people's uncertainty, and to motivate them into action, is there anything else you need? And there's a whole quiet room and everybody comes up with blanks. So we need to be aware of the situation we are in. Where are we in terms of relationship, uncertainty, and motivation? And then we need to pick the principles that help us at that moment in time, which also explains why AI is, in my experience, lousy at this, because it has no situational awareness and it makes stuff up. And then we go into unethical things. But
Constantly
yeah,
makes things up.
so annoying. So we need to find pieces of information, just bring it to the surface. Let me give you one example of how that works. So there was a company who was doing home assessments for insulation value, as in how well is your home insulated? And it would then give people an opportunity to insulate their house fully. And so after they'd done the assessment, which took a fair bit of time, people were instructed on what the financial consequences were of making a change or not. And so half the people were told, and of course the dollar value would vary per home, but let's say that let's use it as an example, $1 per day. So half of the people were told, if you insulate your house fully, you'll be able to save $1 a day. The other half of the people were told, if you fail to insulate your house fully, you will lose $1 a day. 150% more people insulated their house fully with the loss instruction instead of the gain instruction, because scarcity. We value things more that are rare, scared, dwindling in availability, things that we lose. And so by ethically highlighting that it's the same dollar, but if you don't insulate that, you're basically going to have less dollars in your wallet by the end of the year. That made System 1 pay attention, and therefore a lot more people cooperated.
Wow. I can't imagine what our second conversation is going to be like because I didn't show you prior, but I break everything down. I put a lot of effort into having a flow of the conversation. I've jumped around a little bit here because I wanted to get enough information to make sure that people are going to come back. So next episode, we're going to end up talking about obviously the seven universal principles of persuasion and more in depth, the real world cost of getting it wrong, which we've touched a little bit on. And teaching the next generation is something I really want to go over on our next episode. So hopefully we have more time and we get our schedules a little bit more in tune because I believe you have so much great information. I'm excited. We've only scratched the surface, in my opinion, of what you can educate and teach the listeners and viewers and myself.
The good stuff's coming.
Yes, the good stuff is coming. So I'm going to leave some of the closing questions to ask people till our next episode. And I just want to say, Patrick, thank you for coming on. Those listening or watching, we will do a part two to this. You'll be able to hear it next week after you've listened to this one. So I look forward to, I love having two-part episodes. I've done it quite a few times over the last 5.5 years, and resoundingly, people come back more than people realize, right? Those that are listening or watching, if you truly have a spark or any interest, and it's made you even feel like, I call it the warm and fuzzies, I feel it in my chest, right? I know you'll be back, and you're always welcome at the Give a Heck podcast.
For those listening, if a week feels too long, of course, I have a website, ethicalpersuasion.com.au, where you can get more information. There's also a free section with some complimentary things you can access. There's a downloadable ebook that you don't even have to put your name or your email address in for. You can just right click and download. There's an 7-day email challenge where you get a nugget of gold every day. And what we're working to establish, and by the time this airs, that should be there, is we're giving people, I have a 12-month program where people get a little nugget of persuasion gold, a strategy to use every week, and they have access to live Q&A calls with me to make sure that they're understanding it right. We're giving people 5 weeks of complimentary access to that, including the Q&A calls. So you can also access that through the website. And of course, I have my own podcast as well, Ethical Persuasion Unlocked. So, but I think we're going to have a powerful episode here with Dwight, condensing everything together.
Those that are new to the Give a Heck podcast, go to giveaheck.com, go to the top, hit podcast, and you will find everything you need to know about Patrick there. I put in, those that are familiar with the show, very detailed show notes. There'll be chapter summaries, all his social media links, everything he just talked about, I'll ensure is in there as well, to make it so that you can connect. You don't have to wait for episode 2 to get, to give a heck, to take that baby step forward, right? Start today.
And if I could put a request in of those listening, if this is not per se about this episode, but any episode you've listened to before. I mean, Dwight's been doing this for a long time. If you value what you learn here, I know as a podcast host, sometimes it's a little bit quiet in terms of getting feedback from your audience.
Oh my
Dwight
goodness.
would love you if you'd left a testimonial or a review on this show about what it is you value out of this. Why do you keep coming back listening to this? And that could be about this episode or any other. But yeah, we as hosts would always really appreciate hearing from you that way.
I love it. So I don't get very many guests that do what you just did. Normally I go and read a spiel that I just wrote here, and I don't even have to. Those listening and watching, I do appreciate it. I appreciate when you subscribe to the YouTube channel. I appreciate when you leave reviews on your favorite podcast platform. It is so simplistic. If you go into the show notes, there's even a link to rate my podcast, right? You click on that link, it'll actually know where you listen to your podcasts on, whether it's your phone or your computer. It'll give you a quick link to leave a review, to rate it. It's really painless, and I'd really, really appreciate it. Just like Patrick, those little nuggets of information that you share can make a difference in one more person's life. And guess what? It makes a difference in our lives. It knows that you are engaged and appreciate us. So thank you, Patrick, for bringing that up. That is fabulous. I really appreciate that. So again, please subscribe, please leave reviews, and until next time, live life on purpose and not by accident. And remember, it's never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.